On behalf of FedInsider and Carahsoft, we would like to welcome you to today's podcast, focused around election security, protecting the foundation of our democracy, where our panel of election security experts will discuss the challenges, successes, and lessons learned from the 2020 election.
And hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm John Breeden, and I will be moderating what I know will be a lively and interesting discussion about our election processes and the various threats that were arrayed against this foundation of our democracy during the recent election. Prior to the 2020 election, FedInsider hosted a series of 3 webinars on election security. During those programs, which are all available now in the archives for streaming, experts talked about the various threats and potential problems that they anticipated would happen as the election was drawing near, and some of the ways that they plan to mitigate those threats and protect this critical process. Some of those guests are back today for our post-election show, and we also have a couple of new panelists with unique views about the recent election. They will all be talking about what went right during this election, what they learned, and how we can work to ensure that future elections are also kept safe and protected. Because of having such a large and esteemed group of speakers on the show today, it will run for 90 minutes instead of the normal 60. This is a critical topic, but no worries because we have 7 highly experienced experts to break it all down for us. So let me welcome each one of them, and then we can get started. First off, I wanted to welcome Justin Herring. He is the Executive Deputy Superintendent of the New York Department of Financial Services. Welcome back to the forum today, Mr. Herring.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. And let me also welcome the Supervisor of Elections for Okaloosa County, Florida, Paul Lux. Paul, welcome back to the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be back.
Excellent. And we are also pleased to welcome Justin Bernardino. He is the Operations Manager for the Orange County Register of Voters. Mr. Bernardino, it is an honor to have you joining us again today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We are also pleased that Commissioner Ben Hovland, the Chairman of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, is joining us again today. Ben, it's an honor to have you joining us once more for this very important discussion.
Thanks, John. Great to be back.
Great. And that takes care of the introductions to our veterans, but we also have 3 new guests joining us today. The first is Jeff Hale. He is the Director of the Election Security Initiative at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's National Risk Management Center. Welcome to the show today, Jeff.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And our other brand new guest is Louis Robinson. He is the Vice President of Elections Operations at the Center for Internet Security. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Louis.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the time to be on this panel with the other members.
Well, we're really glad to have you here. And our industry representative today is the Chief Security Officer for OCTA, Sean Frazier. Sean, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, John. It's great to be here. And it's OCTA, not like okra, but OCTA.
OCTA, gotcha. No problem.
No worries. Thank you, my friend.
Excellent. So we have some great questions about the cybersecurity threats that you all faced this year, as well as some of the unique challenges that the 2020 election brought. But we have such esteemed panelists. I wanted to remind our audience about some of our guests' experiences and the organizations they represent. So I want to give a little bit of time to each one of our panelists just to kind of talk about who they are and what they did during the recent election. And then we can get into the meat of the presentation. So, Mr. Herring, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do as the Executive Deputy Superintendent of the Department of Financial Services for the great state of New York, where you also lead the newly created Cybersecurity Division? Can you tell us a little bit about what you do there and the size of the constituency that you serve?
Certainly. Thanks, John. And I think you've already kicked it off there. The Department of Financial Services, or DFS, is New York State's financial services industry regulator. So that covers parts of the industry like banking companies, insurance companies, money transmitters, cryptocurrency companies, and others. Our responsibility is to ensure the safety and soundness of the financial services industry and protect consumers. We regulate over 3,000 institutions that have a combined assets of more than $7 trillion. We see cybersecurity as the biggest threat to the financial services industry. And we are, proud to have been a leader in cybersecurity standards for the industry. Our cybersecurity regulation for the financial services industry in New York When we adopted it in 2017, was the first of its kind. And we're proud that it's become a model for other regulators like the FTC and the NAIC. The Cybersecurity Division at DFS was established in 2019 when I joined DFS to serve as the first head of the Cybersecurity Division after having been a cybercrimes prosecutor in the New Jersey and Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office. Cybersecurity Division, we're really devoted to raising the bar for cybersecurity across the financial services industry and handle, regulatory guidance, cyber incident reporting and response, and enforcement actions. Now, as a New York State official, I also work with my colleagues across the state government and beyond on cyber issues that have an impact on New York, its government, as well as its citizens and consumers. And election security has been a big priority for the state for a number of years now. And the state has taken, an all-hands interagency approach, brought together expertise and resources from different sources. So although my department, the Department of Financial Services, does not have a formal role in the New York State government's handling of elections, as part of that cross-state effort and focus on election security, I've been working on election security issues with my colleagues across the state since I first joined the state government in 2019.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Herring, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more from you as the show proceeds. Paul, we learned from you during the previous show that Okaloosa County is an absolutely beautiful place right along the Gulf Coast of Florida, and you also have 180,000 residents who live there, so it's not a tiny population. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do as the Supervisor of Elections and the ways that your constituents normally vote there?
Certainly. So here in Florida, every one of our counties has a Supervisor of Elections. The vast majority of us are elected, not appointed. So, and we get to run in the year of the president. So for some of us, we also had to juggle our own political campaigns in addition to trying to manage all of the elections and COVID and everything else. But each Supervisor of Elections is responsible for everything to do with the election, soup to nuts, for any local, state, or federal election. So all of the voter registration, all of the ballot layout and design, the delivery, the tabulation, the reporting, the auditing, all of that falls under the umbrella of each one of us individual supervisors in the 67 counties. As we saw, like everybody else, we typically, not quite a third here in my county, people voting, some by early voting, some by mail, and some on election day. We typically tended to have a slightly lower turnout for vote by mail and a slightly higher turnout for election day. And of course, COVID-19 considerations, which I know we're going to talk about later, certainly changed that picture. We ended up with an additional 15,000 people voting by mail this time around, an extra 10,000 who attended early voting, which gave them the opportunity to space things out over a couple of weeks before the election. And our election day turnout was actually so severely reduced that my poll workers were a little terrified of what was going on because they had never had a presidential election year that was so slow.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Paul. We'll learn a little bit more about some of the things you mentioned in the show in just a bit. Mr. Bernardino, you are the operations manager for the Register of Voters in Orange County, California, the sixth largest county in the United States, with a population larger than 21 U.S. states. In a previous show, you talked about the complex election issues in your county. Can you refresh our memory about that, as well as talk a little bit about your job responsibilities there in Orange County?
Yeah, so we're complex in size, as you mentioned. We're up to 1.8 million registered voters. We're also complex in the sense that we do our own printing and mailing. So if you think about the 1.8 million voters, we have to print their ballots, we print their voter information guides, we handle all the mailing. In addition to that, we've had a lot of attention from parties and the media because our county's demographics have been becoming there's been more and more parity to our demographics, and the party registrations are pretty much split. In 2018, some congressional seats flipped that were the same party forever, as long as anyone can remember, and then some of those flipped back in 2020, so we get a lot of that attention. Additionally, my responsibilities includes the operations of all those things. We mentioned the mailings, the voting, the technical side, voter services, printing, and all the elections operations.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Justin, for that overview of what must be a complex operation with a very big county. Ben, welcome back to the show to you. If some of our audience does not remember, the Election Assistance Commission is an independent agency of the federal government that was created by the Help America Vote Act of 2002. Can you tell us a little bit about what your agency does and your role as its chairman and as a commissioner?
Thanks, John. Yeah, I know a number of people may not be that familiar with the Election Assistance Commission, or EAC. As you mentioned, we were created by the Help America Vote Act of 2002, which was basically Congress's response to the 2000 election. That legislation created the EAC as a bipartisan independent agency with a number of responsibilities, including the testing and certification of voting equipment. We distribute grant money from Congress to the states for election issues. In 2020, we distributed over $800 million to the states, with about $425 million of that being for election security, and then another $400 million of that being related to the CARES Act for money to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we serve as a national clearinghouse on best practices in election administration, which also includes conducting the Election Administration and Voting Survey, or EVES, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, but is the only national survey of its kind that looks at how Americans are getting registered and voting.
Great. Well, thank you for that overview, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot more from you moving forward. Jeff Hale leads the Election Security Initiative at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which most people just call CISA. He works at the National Risk Management Center. Jeff, you have been involved in CISA's election security mission since 2016. Can you tell us a little bit about that mission and CISA's key activities in this mission space, and who you work for and who you work with in support of that mission?
Thanks, John. Thanks again for having me. That's all correct. We got involved, DHS designated election infrastructure as critical infrastructure back in 2017, largely in recognition of the importance of the integrity of those systems and the threats that they may face. Since that time, CISA has made election security a top priority. My job is really to work closely with election officials and vendors to help support them in managing the risks to their system. That's kind of why we sit in the National Risk Management Center. To do that, we coordinate providing clearances and access to threat intelligence. We have no-cost cybersecurity services, physical security assessments. We give planning, risk mitigation guidance, training, and exercises. We partner with a lot of the people on this call, and in order to provide the information necessary for our election stakeholders to make the most informed risk management decisions possible.
Makes sense. Thank you, Jeff. Lewis Robinson is the Vice President of Elections Operations at the Center for Internet Security. He is responsible for advancing the mission of CIS's Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and has a deep history in cybersecurity, where he has supervised cybercrime investigations, cyber incident response, digital forensics, and initiatives that mitigated the risk of cyber attacks against critical infrastructures. Lewis, can you tell us a little bit about that and what the Center for Internet Security does, and also what was its role in the recent election?
Thanks again, John, for the intro. Many participants may be familiar with CIS, but for those who don't, CIS is an independent and trusted nonprofit cybersecurity partner of public and private organizations around the world. Our best practices are complemented by the threat intelligence from our Security Operations Center, truly the heart of the CIS mission. And that SOC supports the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, our MSISAC, and the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, EIISAC. CIS and ultimately the EIISAC role was born out of the 2016 general election and the aftermath. DHS, NAS, NASED, the EAC, as well as local election organizations with CIS discussed the possibility of creating an ISAC devoted solely to the nation's elections infrastructure. So in 2017, DHS agreed to conduct a pilot elections ISAC with 7 states. That pilot proved successful, and in 2018, DHS and the Election Infrastructure Subsector Government Coordinating Council, quite a mouthful there, tasked CIS to stand up the Elections Infrastructure ISAC.